If something in your relationship feels off, but you can't explain why. If you've spent years trying harder in the relationship and yet it just keeps hurting, this space is for you. Welcome to the Covert Narcissism podcast. If you've been asking yourself, is this abuse or am I just overreacting? This episode is for you. Welcome back to the Covert Narcissism podcast, where we talk about covert narcissism, covert narcissistic abuse, and the confusing invisible patterns that can make you doubt your own reality. In our third CNG community chat, we are answering the question so many survivors ask: why was it so hard to call this abuse? We talk about how emotional abuse gets normalized, especially when you grew up around similar dynamics, when faith messages pressure you to try harder, or when you've been taught that marriage is just difficult. You'll hear why many survivors label it communication problems or a difficult marriage instead of abuse, how the good times keep hope alive, and why the public version of a covert narcissist can make you feel isolated and unbelievable. We also touch on the confusing role of intermittent kindness and why even that can keep you stuck, questioning yourself and minimizing what is happening behind closed doors. If you've been living in the fog of confusion, this conversation will help you put language to what you've been carrying. I want to start by apologizing for the recording quality of this conversation. I am traveling right now and had some technical difficulties, but I did not want to delay in getting this episode out to you. So let's get started. So we are here in the community chat today, and I have Olivia, Cindy, and Shannon here with us. And ladies, first, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited to have you here for our third community chat. The title of this episode is, Why Was It So Hard to Call This Abuse? I imagine that you had a hard time calling it abuse or you wouldn't have signed up for this community chat. So somebody want to get us started just to answer that question. Why was it so hard to call what you were going through to call it abuse?
I think for me, some of it had to do with experiencing some of the same behaviors in my childhood and growing up in relationships that I saw. And so it wasn't abnormal per se. And then just also just trying to keep the peace in the relationship, and there were a lot of good times and then times that weren't good, and I just didn't see it until further into my own healing that it was abuse.
Okay. It's extremely common that we don't see it because we experience stuff like this in our childhood. Like that is extremely common. And so it's normalized behavior from childhood.
To be honest, it never occurred to me that it was abuse. And the reason for that is because when I met my husband, he had what we would call a nightmare mother. And so I was kind of aware that he had come from a really difficult family. So for me, it was just always trying to prove to him that I loved him, because I felt that he'd come from a family without any love.
So you wanted to make sure that you were the opposite of what he had been through in his childhood?
Yeah, I wanted to just love. I mean, I did. I fell in love with him. I met him in the church, and I fell in love with him. And yeah, just kind of always trying to prove that I loved him, and I'd do anything for him.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so it wasn't really. I never ever occurred to me that I was being abused. It was just that it was him that had been abused.
Cindy, why was it so hard for you to call this abuse?
Well, I said the same thing pretty much. I was very young when I got married, and it started just a few years later. And I grew up that way as well and watched my mom try to fix all my dad's moods. So I just fell into it. And because there were the good times more frequently than the bad times, I just too kept putting it aside and saying, it isn't that bad. Truly, it's not that bad. It is far from abuse, right? And I just couldn't connect the dots. That's what I did.
Yeah.
for years. You love somebody, he had a tough job, I made the excuses, you know, that I could fix it and make it all better.
Yeah. Did you all think that, marriage is just tough and sometimes it's just like, well, all marriages are hard, and so you don't think of this as being abusive behavior?
At the time, I know I didn't. The only marriage I really saw was my parents. So
Mhm.
mine looked like that. And it wasn't until many years later when I witnessed, my daughter's, unfortunately, that many years later, my daughter's marriage. And I thought, wow, that's love and respect and care and taught communication and all the things that a marriage should be. So that was a real eye opener for me. And I didn't witness many people's marriages.
That's fair. Shannon, how about you?
Definitely marriage is hard. My parents are divorced. They're both remarried. Other, divorces that happened, and also just I think the Generation X, the way we grew up, we didn't talk a lot about feelings and things like this, especially outside of the home, or at least that's what I saw. And so, yeah, you just kind of keep trying to move forward and keep things, going the best that they can.
Mhm. I couldn't call it abuse. Were there other words that you did call it? Other words that maybe felt more acceptable, socially acceptable, or safer to use? Because clearly you knew that there were still problems. Like I used, all marriages are difficult. So I called it a difficult marriage. Did you guys have, you know, verbiage that did feel comfortable to you?
I just thought we had communication problems. Like, we didn't know, like, I was speaking German and he was speaking French. Like, we just didn't have the right way to talk to each other where we didn't take offense to the other person or it didn't become something bigger. Especially the instances that became big blow ups or issues. But also, looking back now, I never really saw the day-to-day stuff that was happening. It's taken other people to point that out to me that I was living that way with the way I was being talked to and disrespected, etc. All throughout. I was only ever thinking of the big fights or the big issues that would
Mhm.
happen, for the most part until the last couple years.
How about you, Cindy? Did you have other words that you did use to describe the difficult times?
No, again, I didn't. I think I keep wanting to blame it on youth. I just kept plugging along, and I guess what I did was blame it on his job and his upbringing, and he worked long hours. So
Mhm.
I also could handle it much better because I was a little somewhat intimidated by him as well. He had
Okay.
a tough personality from the get-go, and I was somewhat afraid. I just kinda knew to keep my mouth shut, and it worked for quite a few years because I didn't see him many hours a day. And so I didn't realize, what I just didn't know what else to do. I was 20, at the time, and yeah.
Yeah.
So, no, I didn't label it as anything else.
It sounds like you made the excuses like what I made. Well, he's having a
Yes,
tough day or he's under a lot of stress. And so those are still labels of that bad behavior.
yes. And I'm not sure when the actual, horrific words started, but maybe in those early days, it was more the silent treatment, just leave me alone, and like you said, Shannon, there was no communication, absolutely none, none.
Mhm.
I did my part, and he was always, tired, and yeah. So
Yeah. Olivia, did you have other words that you used instead of abuse that maybe felt safer to call this?
Yeah, I used to say awkward, difficult, impossible, always my fault. And I basically always needed to try harder. It was down to me to try and make this okay and make it, do you know what I mean? And sort
Mhm.
of get the communication going. And it was, so you'd kind of sit there trying to think of the right words to kind of approach something, and and it
Mm-hmm.
was never good enough. It was never good enough,
Yeah.
whatever you done.
So did you feel like your own desire to be a good person kind of helped you to keep blinders on to never see their bad behavior? It just was my job to fix it, like what you're voicing. It was just my job to make it better, my job to fix it, my job to love it out of them. All of that kind of kept me from ever really seeing the abuse as abuse.
I think it made it really difficult because he turned into an angel when people came. When people visited the house, all of a sudden you'd see this really cooperative, kind, generous person that you hadn't been living with for the last, for a few years. And so it was really difficult because other people would always say, "Oh, what a wonderful husband you've got." I mean, just jump up and make the tea, and, "Oh, you stay there and have a chat with Olivia and I'll do this." And you're kind of going, "Really?"
Who are
But
you?
yeah, but because that was all friends and family saw, it was if you ever kind of went round to see mum or whatever and say like, "Oh, it's really difficult at the moment," and my mum would say, "Oh, you leave him alone. He works hard and he's so kind and he's so generous." And so you kind of felt like you were up against it because nobody else saw what you experienced,
Yeah,
because
that
they
makes
experienced a completely different person to what you were
Mhm.
experiencing.
And that makes complete sense, and it adds to this massive amount of confusion. Shannon and Cindy, did either of you also have that where your family and friends thought that he was great and wonderful?
I couldn't have said it better than Olivia, and to a T. Um, I think for me, all of that has come to the surface far more that I can recognize than I ever used to, where I can, like you said, see each and every time he would do it. He could as much as be in he's a rager, so he'd yell to the top of his lungs, and we could walk out the door to some social event and just, "Hey, how's it going?" and just turn on the charm. And I never could do that. It was much harder for me to. So people, they're charmers. At least mine is, and that is extremely difficult for me to
Mhm.
um, to deal with because I know the truth behind closed doors.
Yeah.
And there is no changing that. And I feel the more that I called him out, the more that this has come to a head, the more self-respect I had for myself, the the more he shines to everybody else. It's like I'll convince them all it's all her, when because I am in a divorce position right now. So
Yeah.
that's what he's doing, even
Okay.
more so.
Shannon, did you go through some of this as well?
Mine's the opposite from the stand. This is one area where my ex differs than a lot of the stereotype. Is he was more of a standoffish person, especially with family and everything. Like, he was cordial, but he would so there wasn't that. But where that behavior was certainly with people at work, or more casual type of situations we'd be in. But most people weren't saying that they saw like a total different person like that. The interesting thing for me was when we would be around some of his work people or whatever, I would hear stories about how many nice things he would say about me. And I'd never heard those things myself. So he was definitely projecting a different image than like I felt of our relationship and how he felt towards me too. So that's like the closest my situation was.
Well, that's just a different form of the confusion. It's the same
Very,
kind of
very
confusion.
confusing, yes.
Yes, it's just a different angle, you know?
Yeah. I
Um,
remember saying to him, "Why don't I get that version at home?"
right. Well, and it's those moments of, I mean, if you'll call it kindness, even if it's all for show, but
Mhm.
those moments of kindness, they really complicate our ability to see the harm that's going on, to see the abuse as abuse, okay? And it's that, we talk about intermittent reinforcement where bad behavior, bad behavior, bad behavior, and then one good day, one good evening, one good, a time when you're out socially and he looks like the perfect angel, and you actually have a really good time. That one good evening for me could wipe away 2 months of bad behavior,
For sure.
and did you guys go through that as well, where I can remember even consciously in my mind, it was like a reset button. It was like, "Okay, there he is. We're back. We're okay." And it was like I was also trying to push away the bad behavior. I didn't want to hang on to it.
Yeah, I agree. I would definitely, I remember like thinking to myself in some of those instances, like, okay, it's going to be okay now. And so I think that was part of the problem for me in my relationship is I was treating those types of big events as the problem and we would get past them maybe by ignoring them or whatever it might be, but we would get past them and then it would be a while until the next like big event type of issue would come up. So that's next thing you know, you look up and it's 20 something years.
Yeah. Olivia, how about you? How long was your relationship?
32 years.
32 years. Wow.
32 years, yeah. Yeah, and I would say the first 10 years were kind of okay. You know, there wasn't, I'd never really suspected anything, but once I was a mum of 2 kids, that's when the cracks started to show, and I realized that it was just impossible to co-parent with him. You know, there was like everything I tried to do, it was as if he was just undoing it all behind my back, you know. But
Right.
in the rare occasions that he was kind and generous, I'd kind of think to myself, it kind of reassured me that he was trying. He was trying, you know. And so you think, oh, well, he is trying, but his normal is not my normal because I had a loving parents, you know, thankfully still got them, but you know, but he didn't. So I kind of always felt like I had to be an example to him to show him this is how you love the children. This is how, you know, families work, sort of thing, you
Mhm.
know. But yeah, it was, I mean, yeah, I found it really, really difficult once the children were sort of 4, I think it was 4 and 6. They were 4 and 6 years old when I remember sort of standing in disbelief, because he'd done something that I just thought was absolutely outrageous and immoral in front of the children. You know, and that was the kind of first realization that I'm dealing with someone who's got something severely wrong with them. You know, just
Wow.
like had a no moral compass and no integrity.
Yeah.
You know.
So you realized it that far back
Yes.
and then still had to kind of work your way through raising kids in that environment and surviving that environment.
Yeah, and to be honest, I wanted a divorce, and I spoke to my mum, but being a nice Christian family, it was like, you know, oh, come on, you've got to try and make it work. Maybe you should go on holiday, you know, maybe you need a break and all that kind of thing. So we did. We went on holiday, and you know, then like I say, there was moments of, you know, happiness and some good times, but actually co-parenting was impossible.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah, and the hope that comes when that good behavior is there, and especially when they sustain it for a little while. They can sustain it for a while. And you go through these good phases instead of seeing the patterns of all the bad behavior, good behavior, bad behavior, like this yo-yo back and forth. Every time we got back to good behavior, for me, it kind of landed with hope inside of me of, okay, we're doing better. We're making progress. I kept feeling like we're making progress, but I didn't realize till well into my marriage that it wasn't we were making progress. We were on a hamster wheel and we weren't going anywhere. Yeah. Cindy, how long was your marriage?
Hmm. 49 years.
Wow.
So I'm in the process now, and basically haven't spoken to my husband since September. We lived together in this house from September until he left for our winter home, and he's there alone. I certainly should have left him many years ago, and I knew that. At first, it was that when I was so young with 2 young children and didn't feel financially like I could do that. So I always had my excuses. And as I say, my mom persevered with 4 children, and you just hang in there. And I feel I was really in that trauma bond phase, probably 5 years in. We didn't have children for 4 years. And this was the man I loved to the ends of the earth. If a marriage fails when you really truly fell in love for all the right reasons, and it goes good for that, and then all of that bad, what I want to label as sick behavior starts, I was just trauma bonded because he'd throw me the bone and we'd have good times. And I kept saying, okay, yes, I can do this, and I can't do it alone. So I just kept going and going and going. And I mean, I knew, and now that I've done so much work and, talked to RENEE with some coaching and stuff, I just realized the hamster wheel, the cycle, and there's a reason for it. Your brain gets altered, and I was definitely just in a cycle with him.
Did you believe over all those years that the good outweighed the bad?
Not for many of them, no. I wanted a
Okay.
divorce in many ways. I moved out once before, but I was I think, RENEE, even you said it, I wanted to believe it so bad. I thought there was hope. When I moved out, he moved me out. He tried to be kind. But that is the day, now that I reflect, that I know he has not felt a thing for me at that time. And that is him thinking, how dare she? How dare she have done that to me? And he just couldn't get anything back. And what he told me, he's actually been quite honest. And I hadn't wanted to believe the words. He'd say, well, this is a business agreement. I told you I don't want a divorce. And I'm in tears, and I'm telling, I want to talk, I want to fix it. And he would sit there in silence, and I'd say, well, do you have anything to say? Cindy, I told you I don't want a divorce. Well, whose fault is this? Mine. I should have left, but I'm leaving now. I told RENEE, I'm embarrassed to say 49 years. And sweetly, she told me it's never too late. So RENEE has been instrumental in helping me.
Yeah.
And plus, when I said back then that that was when he quit loving me, that is when he realized he lost his supply. And RENEE, that's your other word to me, that I am no longer filling that need of taking care of his every need.
Yeah, when I think of that kind of abuse or abuse in that way, it's like they take the straw and they stick a straw inside of us and they just suck us out. It's like they suck you dry of all of your, care and compassion and love and empathy and time and energy and effort, all of it, to where you just have nothing left. And so when I think of abuse, and I don't think of, the aspect of physical abuse in my situation, but I think of that, of just like a leech, just sucking everything out of you. Now, I'm going to put the question on the table. For me, I did not experience any physical abuse in all of this. And so I'm going to put the question out there to you guys of, did you experience any physical abuse in this relationship?
So I did. At least 3 times that I remember. And it's interesting. I think, Cindy, you said something about, well, it's not that bad. And not speaking necessarily physical abuse, but just what you were experiencing. And I just remember thinking the times that happened, and one of them that I remember is before we were even married. And afterwards I like begged him to, not be mad at me and like all of this stuff. I think back now and I'm just like, wow, no wonder that's as I changed and grew, that's what he was missing because of how I was in the beginning. Well, not just the beginning, in a lot of our relationship, just very needing him and all of that. Definitely, like you said, Cindy, giving him the supply. But the physical abuse stuff was also, like I mentioned, few and far between. I think in the 24 years, again, I say that I can remember, it was 3 times. Um, and with many years in between. So I never late. There's always people that have it worse. You think about the people in the domestic violence shelters, et cetera. Like it seems to be a part of their daily life is kind of the story that you hear. And so for me, it's like, well, that's not me. It's just I made him mad or I did whatever, that type of thing. And so even when physical abuse happened, I still didn't label I'm in an abusive relationship.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point, and I thank you for sharing that because, in making the excuses, one of the things in my head that I made the excuse of, well, at least he's not hitting me. At least it's not physical abuse. At least he's not cheating on me. Those were 2 that, did stick out in my head that kind of got in the way of me calling it abuse. But you're saying, and I didn't live this, so you can speak to it. You're saying that even in the face of physical abuse, you still said, this is not abuse.
Yeah, and I think I shared with you too that at one point, and this is probably 15 years or so ago, I volunteered at a domestic violence shelter. And you have to go through a lot of training to do that. And I flat out lied. Like at the time, I know I had at least experienced one physical abuse, but just even you learn about the emotional, the psychological, all of that too. And I felt compelled to be there in some way for, these women in this organization, but I like didn't consider myself one. And then the even more surreal thing, I guess I would say, is the most recent physical abuse was a strangulation. Like I could have died, and I still stayed with him for, 2-3 years or whatever. And it's just like I don't know what was going on in my head that I didn't make myself get out of the situation then. And it wasn't until Cindy, and do not be embarrassed, about 49 years at all. But I sit there and think it wasn't until I started seeing my now young adult children in relationships and knowing that they weren't in the best relationships. It's like, how can I give them advice when I'm in this type of relationship? Like I'm literally modeling this type of relationship with them. And that's finally what allowed me to start opening my eyes more to even just the daily verbal, emotional, psychological abuse.
That leads us right into the next question, which is, was there a moment or was it a slow accumulation when something finally started shifting for you that you could see this as abuse? In part 1, you heard how common it is to minimize, make excuses, and turn the blame inward. Not because you're weak, but because these dynamics are designed to keep you confused. When you've been trained to keep the peace, protect the image, and work harder, it makes perfect sense that calling it abuse feels impossible. In part 2 next week, we go deeper into what finally shifts, whether it's one moment or a slow accumulation of moments, when you start seeing the pattern clearly. We will talk about how this changes your relationship with yourself and what it takes to rebuild self-trust. If this episode resonates with you, share it with someone who needs words for what they are going through. And I'll see you next week in part 2. I wish you so much peace on your journey of healing. If there were ever an audience that I wish did not have to exist, it would be this one. Because of what it means you've lived through. I'm truly sorry that you understand this so deeply. And I'm really glad that you're here. May this be a place of safety, clarity, and peace. You are not alone anymore, and you don't have to figure this out by yourself. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe so you don't miss future conversations. And if you'd like to learn more about the support, resources, or coaching that is available for you, you can visit covertnarcissism.com. While I hate it for everyone who understands what I am talking about, I'm really glad that you're here, and I wish you so much peace on your journey of healing. The information provided by RENEE Swanson, Covert Narcissism Podcast, and CNG Life Coaching is for educational purposes only and is not to be used for diagnosis purposes. It is not intended to be a substitute for clinical care. Please consult a healthcare provider for guidance specific to your case. This material discusses narcissism in general. RENEE shares stories from her personal experience as well as from those that she has worked with for several years. Her material does not claim that any specific person has narcissism and should not be used to refer to any specific person as having narcissism. Permission is not granted to link to or repost this material to support an allegation or support a claim that any specific person is a narcissist. That would be an unauthorized misuse of the material and the information provided. Thank you.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.